And welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. My name is Matt Del Vecchio, specializing in life transitions, downsizing in the senior living industry.
And I'm Corrie Sirota, clinical social worker and author of Someone Died, Now What? A personal and professional perspective on coping with grief and loss. Well, folks, welcome to our segment on helping moms and dads. We have been, over the last several weeks, providing you with guidance and support to those of you who consider yourselves or see yourself as the sandwich generation. We've had interesting and knowledgeable guests that have covered a vast array of topics. And typically they are really helpful in supporting families in coping with the challenges of the aging process. Today is no exception. Matt, what do we got going on today?
Yeah, excited to talk about this segment, and we're going to be talking about long-term care. And it was quite interesting. Let's go pre-pandemic. Long-term care, we had kind of known about it, but talk about being on the minds of the general public and the general treatment of our elderly. And we wanted to address this, and that's why we wanted to have Moira Walsh on the show. Moira is amazing. She's an investigative journalist with the Toronto Star. She's co-authored investigations that have won 3 national newspaper awards and a Missioner Award for Public Service Journalism. Moira was a finalist for the Judicia Award for Legal Reporting and the Canadian Hillman Prize. And she started as a breaking news reporter and soon joined the investigative team, where she has written on social justice, the environment, and the lives of people in seniors' homes. Moira lives in Toronto with her family. Moira, welcome to Life Unrehearsed.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks for coming on. I've been waiting a long time to have you on here because it is such an important and timely topic. Can you talk to us more about the state of long-term care prior to the pandemic?
Absolutely. It existed as we saw it exposed in the pandemic, actually. So I've been writing about long-term care since 2003. Basically, very little has changed other than a few progressive homes. Most people spend their days, they are awakened at a specific time. They are rushed out of bed and lined up outside of the dining room to await their breakfast, and usually their plates are whisked away at 8:30 a.m. They'll spend most of the day sitting in a TV room or staring at the floor. There will often be organized activities that are not overly interesting to most of the people living in the home. And this is repeated day after day after day. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very institutional existence where you have no control over your life.
So that said, now we're in the pandemic, and I understand, and you alluded to it. Can you talk a little bit about why the pandemic brought out the frail state of elder care? Because that was happening, but maybe we didn't realize it as much.
Exactly. We just, unless you had a family member in a home, you just weren't aware and we're not thinking about it. So during the pandemic, we were not prepared in Canada, and we saw from the many, many deaths of older adults across the country, in Quebec, in Ontario specifically, but absolutely across the country, that homes were not prepared. And in Ontario, the military was called in to help in a number of homes, and they actually wrote a report that was made public, and it spoke about the same issues that journalists like myself and, many others have written these stories as well, have been talking about for all these years. And they were talking about pressure ulcers, people being left to sit in their briefs for hours at a time so they were soaking wet, lack of medication, inability to get someone to help you eat. So people went hungry, people were dehydrated. This has been a problem for many years in some of the worst homes. I don't want to paint all homes this way, but for the most part, it's been an ongoing problem.
You're listening to Life Unrehearsed with Matt and Corrie, and that's the voice of Moira Walsh, investigative journalist with the Toronto Star. She has a wonderful book called Happily Ever Older, Revolutionary Approaches to Long-Term Care. Moira, you're exactly right. Yes, the Army was here in Quebec as well, and I think, if anything, there is a silver lining with the pandemic that all this has come out. And you know what? The boomers, as we age, are no longer going to accept this. And if it's got to start somewhere, it's got to start now. And I love you really focus in about the importance of seniors living with purpose and energy and love. So why is this so important?
It makes all the difference in life. And frankly, I think there's so much ageism in society that we're only now really starting to speak about. And it's sort of taught all of us, socially and in institutions, that older adults cease to exist in a sense. In a sense, we sort of look at older people and think they've lost their humanity. And in fact, there is absolutely no difference between someone who's in their 90s and someone who's in their 50s or 60s, other than perhaps, certain opportunities you can do through, whatever physical limitations you may or may not have. But there's always a desire to learn something new, to be involved in your community, and to live up to your potential, no matter what that may be at whatever period of life you're in.
So, Moira, can you explain, or do you, off the top of your head, have some examples of what you mean by living with energy and love?
Absolutely. So I'll give you some examples of some of the homes that I visited for my book. I went across North America and into the Netherlands, and what I saw was really, really interesting and heartening. For example, there was a home called Carroll Woods Retirement Community in North Carolina. And it's not really a home. It really is a retirement community where people, when they turn 65, they move in there, and they're very healthy, vibrant people. A lot of people from the local university, retired professors move there, and bureaucrats and so on. But so this is a place where, instead of the traditional retirement homes where they create activities, at 10:30 in the morning, and then at 3:30 in the afternoon, there might be a bean bags for a toss or something of that nature.
Yeah.
They create their own committees. So they have dog committees. They've got various types of flower and various rose committees. They have gardening committees. They have folk music committees, opera music, painting. I could go on and on and on. There are 80 of these. And so that creates a very self-sufficient, sustaining community. But what's also really interesting is their commitment to people, to the inclusion of people with cognitive decline. So you move in there in your 60s, and maybe, if most people just stay there. So maybe when you're 75, you might develop memory loss. And so there's a really tight community philosophy where nobody is left outside, so to speak. And one example that I think is really illustrative is the man they told me about who was a retired CIA agent. And we know that when people live with cognitive decline, sometimes they relive very vivid periods of their past. And he often, he would go for walks every morning, and the volunteers would walk behind him, giving him there's 120 acres. It's a pretty exceptional location through a forest. He would walk for at least an hour every morning, and then he would come back and report to the CEO of the home what he had seen on his rounds, thinking that he was, in a foreign country, sort of checking out the scene. But the CEO said to me, imagine if he was locked in one of those memory care units where he had to sit in a chair all day. What would he have been like? And that's the point. He had freedom of movement. He was able to burn off energy. He could sleep. And instead of sitting and being enclosed in a small space and becoming agitated and potentially aggressive, he had the ability to live a much more natural existence.
That's Moira Walsh. She's the author of Happily Ever Older, Revolutionary Approaches to Long-Term Care. Moira, we have to head out to traffic, but you've traveled the world. You've done some incredible journalism, and we're going to hear a couple more of these examples of novel approaches, and we just don't want to talk way down in the future. We want to be able to talk right now. What we can do is as the public and what governments can do. And we're going to hear your opinion on that. But first, we have to head out to traffic and hear from Joe Fitzgerald at the CJAD Traffic Center.
I'm Corrie Sirota. I'm here with my co-host, Matt Delvecchio, and we are talking to investigative journalist Moira Walsh, the author of Happily Ever Older, Revolutionary Approaches to Long-Term Care. I absolutely love that title. Moira, what are some, you mentioned a little bit, I want to go into more of them because I think that you have such a vast array of novel approaches to long-term care. Can you share some of them with us?
Absolutely. Some of the more interesting homes use, they all use different models and philosophies, and really there's a shared DNA between all of these, I would say. But one example is the Greenhouse Project. It's from the United States. It was created by a geriatrician named Dr. Bill Thomas, and he was actually inspired by the small households built in Saskatoon, a Saskatoon long-term care home, and they were designed by a woman named Sue Ellen Beatty. And but Greenhouse has a lot of evidence-based studies behind it, and I think that's very helpful as people are trying to create or push for change, because homes and governments want to see that. So it actually did really well during COVID. Because the households are smaller, the roughly 10 residents with private bedrooms and private washrooms, studies from the United States found that it had a much lower incidence of COVID and correspondingly of deaths. And so that's really interesting. It also has fewer cases of emergency visits to the hospital and pressure ulcers and residents who are bedfast. And I think what all of these homes share also is the staff satisfaction, because the workers are such an important piece in terms of transforming long-term care. And so when you give workers the autonomy to actually connect with the people in their care and to work with the same people so that everyone gets to know each other and develop relationships, then that provides jobs of meaning to people. And I think that's something that homes are really going to start to look at, because there's an incredible staffing shortage right now, and it doesn't look like it's going to get better if homes still operate as institutions.
I think you're bringing up such an important point, more about the labor. These are wonderful people, and we need more good, skilled labor. And bringing awareness to this, I think, will be important. And I'm so happy you brought up some examples like the Greenhouse Project, because I'd like to say this isn't necessarily pie in the sky stuff for us. The pandemic has brought things forward, and the industry is advancing. Even right here in Montreal, I'm in the residences all the time, and I could say there are some that are being very proactive. I was in one the other day for those specializing in memory care, and you walk down the hallway and there's a post office and there's a train station, and it's just bringing them back into their 50s and 60s and memory. So we're making progress. We have a heck of a long way to go. And more, I want to focus in on two specific aspects to get your opinion. One about the government and one about just general public. Let's start with the general public. What can all of us do to make a difference right now in how we care for our elders?
Some of it is options that we've probably been doing for a while, or we can start easily to call our local member of parliament and speak about that. And provincially, obviously, long-term care is a provincial issue, except that there is talk right now of a federal long-term care act. We don't really know where that's headed right now, but that certainly federally, I think they need some pressure as well on them to create some change. The other thing is, if you have a family member in a home or on a local committee, I've talked to all sorts of community groups that are now going in and talking to their local long-term care operators and saying, this is what we want. We're part of this community. You need to change. And I think it's so interesting how people have really awakened to this issue through the pandemic, especially the first wave of the boomer generation started turning 75 during the pandemic. So they're, as you mentioned earlier, they're very, very motivated. So I think going in and really talking to the homes is something else. And showing these ideas and showing how you can actually benefit from them. And that's the other piece of this is, Greenhouse talks about savings related to supplements. Most homes give people supplements because they don't eat much, often because the food is at a specific time and they might not feel like eating. Greenhouse, you can eat from a beautiful family-style kitchen anytime you want. And so they save $125,000 to $150,000 US a year just from avoiding the purchase of those boost supplements alone. Lots of other medical savings that government would benefit from as well. So there's that piece of it. And then in terms of what people can do as well, right now is an interesting time because we have new draft standards for national long-term care standards. There are two sets of them. One is, you can find it if you Google Canadian Standards Association. And the second one, you can look up Health Standards Organization. Both of those are looking at new ways of creating resident-focused care and small household design in long-term care homes, which is a huge move forward. And so they're looking for public feedback. So the more people who respond to these ideas and say what they're looking for, then the politicians know that more people are interested in this issue. And so that picks up speed.
So with that said, now broader perspective, what do you suggest some of the governments, what can governments start doing right now to make a difference in elder care?
I think the governments could support some of these programs. No, they don't have to be an official greenhouse model or an Eden alternative model specifically. But you can also, if you have strong leadership within the home, you could support them through funding and other measures of bringing in this kind of transformation into long-term care. It's much more detailed than I can say in a few minutes, but absolutely it is possible. And we are seeing that people are moving towards this now. And another piece of it that's really important, again, comes down to staffing. All homes across the country need more funding for staff, but they also need training for staff to help staff understand how to connect with people with cognitive decline and how to support people and interact with them using emotional intelligence and empathy. And so the model of extra staff and well-trained staff combined with support for some of these new philosophies and models within the homes can make a big difference at the start.
Certainly can. I could see it every day. We all need to advocate for better staff to resident ratios, better training. Ultimately, the increase in numbers will result in better care. That's the bottom line. Moira, thank you so much for coming on Life Unrehearsed. You have an excellent book called Happily Ever Older, Revolutionary Approaches to Long-Term Care. How can people get a hold of it?
Oh, they can buy it at any bookstore or online. At Amazon is a good place, or Indigo Books. But you can also order it from your local bookstore and support them.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I have to reiterate, Maura, you weren't jumping on the pandemic wagon and long-term care as this happened. You've been doing this for years and years and years and advocating for it. So thank you so much for your advocacy.
Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
All right. That's Moira Walsh, author of Happily Ever Older, Revolutionary Approaches to Long-Term Care. All right, Corrie, what do we have coming up next week on Life Unrehearsed?
Next week on Life Unrehearsed, we'll be talking about aging in place, renovations and remodeling tips to live safely in our homes as we age. And when it comes to grief and loss, do men and women grieve differently?
Yeah, two important topics. That'll be next week. Thank you for tuning in to Life Unrehearsed. And as a reminder, for all your inquiries or assistance with navigating home care, seniors residences, or downsizing, it'd be my pleasure to help. Our services are completely free. Call me at Lianas Senior Transition Support at 514-622-8255. 8074 or look us up under lianasservices.com. Many thanks to our technical producer, Cedric. You can listen to Life Unrehearsed here on CJAD 800 every Saturday at 3 p.m.